The surgeon stopped the surgery just minutes before they took him into the operating room. The scale had already shown 628 pounds, and his oxygen levels were falling faster than anyone expected. But the weight alone wasn't what frightened the doctor most. What happened over the next 75 days would decide whether he ever got another chance at surgery. In the pre-op bay, just minutes before surgery, the pulse oximeter clipped to Evan Calder's finger began to fall fast enough to change the room before anyone raised a voice. A nurse glanced at the monitor, then at his chest, which was working too hard for a man lying still. The oxygen number dipped again. The anesthesiologist, already half turned toward the medication cart, stopped and looked back. Plastic tubing hissed softly at Evan's nose. The bariatric bed creaked when he tried to pull in a deeper breath, but the breath did not seem to reach all the way down. His chart sat open on the counter beside a stack of forms and wristbands. The latest number was impossible to miss. 628 pounds. The room had been moving with the practiced rhythm of a surgery morning. Confirm the name. Confirm the procedure. Check. The line check. The airway. Move him. When the OR was ready, then the rhythm broke. What had been routine became conditional. Evan tried to lift one hand, more irritated than frightened at first. "I'm fine," he said, though the sentence came out shorter than he intended. "I'm just winded." No one answered him right away. The nurse adjusted his position by inches, then watched the monitor again. The adjustment did not help much. Even under the thin hospital blanket, the swelling in his lower legs was hard to ignore. His abdomen looked tight, more strained than the weight on paper alone should have explained. The body on the bed and the number in the chart did not seem to be telling exactly the same story. Rachel Calder stood near the curtain-lined coat, still on, hands clenched around the strap of her purse. She had not stepped far enough into the room to interfere, but she had not stepped back either. She watched the monitor, the way people watch a highway shoulder in the dark, waiting for the next bad sign. Then, Dr. Helen Ward came in. She did not rush. That made the shift in the room feel worse. She took one look at Evan's face, one at the monitor, then reached for the chart. Her eyes paused at the weight, then moved to the notes from the pre-op workup. When she looked back at him, it was with the kind of attention that stripped all false comfort out of the air. "How long has he been this short of breath this morning?" she asked. "Since transfer," the nurse said. "He never really settled." Dr. Ward placed the chart down without closing it. "We're stopping here." Evan stared at her. "Stopping what?" "The push to take you back," she said. "I'm not putting you under like this." The words landed harder than any alarm. For weeks, this day had existed as a door, narrow, expensive, difficult, but still a door. Now, with a few clipped sentences, it looked less like an opening than a threshold about to seal shut. "It's the surgery that's supposed to fix this," Evan said, breath catching at the end. Dr. Ward did not soften. "Surgery can help you," she said. "Anesthesia can also kill you if your body is this unstable when we start." No one in the room moved. The monitor kept tracing its indifferent line. Rachel's eyes went to her brother, then back to the doctor, as if one of them might give the other permission to say something less final. Instead, Dr. Ward stepped closer to the bed and looked directly at Evan. "I need to know what I'm looking at," she said. "Is this your body telling me you didn't hold up your end of the process?" Her glance flicked once toward the chart, or is something else going wrong that makes today even more dangerous than we thought? That was the question that changed the morning. Not whether he wanted the surgery, not whether he had suffered enough to deserve it, whether the body under 628 pounds was failing because he had lost the process or because it was collapsing in a deeper, more complicated way. And if Dr. Ward could not answer that now in this room, on this bed, then there might not be another surgery morning waiting for him later. The answer lay in the weeks that had led to this pre-op bay and in the brutal rule that had been set for him long before dawn broke over the hospital parking lot. 75 days earlier, the problem was not in an operating room. It was in the short distances inside Evan Calder's house, distances that had begun to beat him. The reinforced bed took up most of the bedroom wall, leaving a narrow lane of carpet between the mattress and the dresser. From there to the bathroom doorway was not far. From there to the front porch, where transport pickup usually waited, was farther, but still ordinary by any measure that did not include a failing body. Evan had once treated those distances like inconveniences. Now he studied them the way a man might study ice before stepping onto it. Rachel moved through the room with the efficiency of someone who had run the same sequence too many times to waste words on it. Phone folder, bottled water, insurance card, the small towel he liked on the transfer chair, the pills lined up on the kitchen counter for later. None of it looked dramatic. That was the point. The whole house had quietly reorganized itself around keeping him moving just enough to reach appointments and make it back alive. Evan pushed at the bed rail and swung one leg, then the other, to the edge. His breathing changed almost immediately. Rachel looked over. "Take a second." "I am taking a second," he said. "You got a stopwatch now." The sarcasm came easily. It always did when the room became too small and too helpful. He planted both feet and sat there a moment longer, his chest rising high, his face already tight with effort. The skin over his lower legs looked stretched, his socks cut deeper into his ankles than they should have. Some mornings, the swelling seemed too big for what he had eaten, too heavy for what simple fat alone should have explained. Evan did not talk about that. He had his own way of denying danger. He mocked the logistics and ignored the pattern. The trip to the bathroom threshold should have taken seconds. He made it halfway before stopping with one hand against the wall. Rachel stayed close enough to catch a fall, but not close enough to humiliate him by hovering. He took another step, then another, and by the doorway, his breathing had turned ragged. "Sit," she said. "I'm standing. You're not walking." He let out something halfway between a laugh and a grunt, then reached for the transfer chair. It rolled an inch when his weight shifted. The movement was small, but it broke his balance. Rachel grabbed the back of the chair. He caught the wall with both hands and stayed upright only because there was nowhere else for his body to go. The silence after that was worse than the stumble itself. From the porch came the low rumble of the transport van pulling in. The driver would not come inside yet. They all knew the rule. The patient had to make it to the pickup point. Rachel steadied the chair and said more carefully now, "We can reschedule." "For what?" Evan said, still trying to get enough air to make his voice sound normal. "For next year." She did not answer. She did not need to. His chart was already full of dates. A little later, after he reached the porch in pieces instead of one trip, Rachel read off the last two weigh-in notes from the clinic sheet she kept folded in her folder. The numbers were not catastrophic. They were worse than that. They were slow. Dr. Helen Ward did not begin with belief. She began with the margin of safety around Evan Calder's heart, his lungs, and the anesthesia that would have to carry him through surgery, and with the fact that his body had moved too close to the line where vagueness was no longer acceptable. The scale room was small enough to make every number feel public. Evan watched the digital display settle, then stop. 628. No one reacted with surprise. That was worse than surprise. Rachel stood beside the wall with the folder tucked to her chest while the nurse wrote the number down and opened the door to the consultation room. Evan rolled his shoulders once as if irritation could change the reading, then followed at the slower pace his body allowed. Dr. Ward was already seated when he came in. His chart lay open on the desk beside scanned images and printed lab sheets. She did not touch any of them at first. She looked at him, then at the notes from his intake, then back again, as though matching the paper version of his condition to the man who had struggled to make it from the scale to the chair. "What happens at home," she said, is not separate from what happens in surgery. Evan said nothing. You're short of breath after short movement. Your oxygen drops too easily. Your lungs are already under pressure from the weight you're carrying, and the more compressed they are, the less room I have during anesthesia. Her finger moved once across the chart, not dramatically, just precisely. That makes every decision in the operating room narrower. There was no scolding in her voice. That made it harder to dismiss. She was not talking about effort in the abstract, or motivation, or whether he had meant well. She was describing mechanics, space, pressure, tolerance, the body as a set of limits now close enough to touch. Rachel shifted in her chair when the clinic administrator knocked lightly and stepped in with a clipboard. The interruption was brief, but it tightened the room further. We've confirmed current approval, the woman said, looking mostly at Dr. Ward and only briefly at Evan. But the surgery window and coverage authorization won't remain open indefinitely. We'll need updated eligibility at the follow-up points. Dr. Ward nodded once. The administrator left as quietly as she had entered, but the message stayed behind. This was not just a medical process. It was a scheduled window, a moving system, a door with paperwork attached to its hinges. Evan exhaled through his nose and looked at the floor. So what exactly do you want me to do? It was the first thing in the room that sounded like the shape of hope. A plan, a target, a path to the table. Doctor. Ward gave him all of that, but not in the tone he was expecting. 60 pounds, 75 days, or no surgery. The sentence sat between them with the force of something stamped, not spoken. Evan looked up sharply. That's it. That is it, she said. Rachel's grip tightened on the folder. Evan stared at the desk, then at the scans, then back at the doctor, as if some softer version of the rule might appear if he waited long enough. Dr. Ward did not offer one. You need to reach 568 pounds, she said, and you need to be stable enough for anesthesia when you get there. The number matters. Stability matters more. If you lose weight, but your body remains too unstable, I still cannot take you into surgery safely. The distinction landed hard. The scale was not a loophole. It was only one gate. And if I miss it, he asked, then I do not operate. The room went still again. No speech about trying his best. No promise that effort alone would earn mercy. Outside the office door, carts rolled past and phones rang in the ordinary rhythm of a clinic day. Inside, the terms of his survival had narrowed to something brutally measurable. Miss this window, and he could lose more than the date on a schedule. He could lose the only intervention left, with any real chance of changing what was happening to his breathing, his mobility, his body's shrinking reserve. Surgery was not guaranteed rescue, but losing it would leave him inside a body already showing how little margin it had left. For a moment, anger was easier than fear. You make it sound like a sentence, he said. Dr. Ward held his gaze. No, she said. I'm telling you where the line is. That was the chapter's hardest truth. The ultimatum did not arrive like advice. It arrived like the border between treatment and refusal, between a difficult path and no path at all. From that point on, every weigh-in, every breath, after a short walk every morning on the calendar would become a temporary answer to a single question, whether Evan Calder was still in time or already moving past it. Trend's not enough, she said. It's moving, not fast enough. The phone rang while the van idled outside. Rachel answered, listened, then handed the phone over on speaker because the scheduler needed to hear him confirm the next visit. The woman from the clinic sounded practiced, not cold. Mr. Calder, we just need to keep you on track. Your surgery slot and approval process can't stay open indefinitely. Evan looked at the porch boards instead of Rachel. Yeah, we need to see progress at the next check. He gave the same answer again, shorter this time. By then, the strain of getting from bed to porch had settled into the room like weather. The transport aide stood with one hand on the lift controls, waiting for the right moment to intervene without making things worse. Rachel held the folder against her side. Evan sat on the transfer chair, drenched, swollen, and angry at how visible all of it had become. The shame was still there. So was the denial. But neither of them could hide the larger truth anymore. His life had stopped being hard to manage and started becoming hard to sustain. When he finally reached Dr. Helen Ward's office, all of this, the stalled wait trend, the breathlessness, the failed transfer, the van outside the scheduler's reminder, would be translated into numbers, a deadline, and consequences no one in that house could bargain with. For the first time since the countdown had been placed over his life, the number on the scale moved in the right direction. But in this story, progress was never allowed to arrive alone. By day 38, Evan Calder's mornings had changed shape. Not softened, just narrowed into something more disciplined and less negotiable. The kitchen counter no longer held random convenience where his hand could reach it. Medications sat in order beside a legal pad Rachel kept for appointments, waits, and call times. The route from bed to bathroom was still short, still humiliating in the way only familiar struggles can be, but it was less chaotic now. He paused less to argue. He saved more breath for the movement itself. That did not make the movement easy. One morning, after getting to the hallway with both hands sliding along the wall for balance, he stood there longer than he meant to, drawing air in shallow pulls while Rachel held the transfer chair steady. "You want a minute?" she asked. He nodded once, too winded to waste energy pretending otherwise. The change was small, but it mattered. He was no longer bargaining with the process. He was inside it. At the clinic, the scale confirmed that much. The nurse read the new number aloud, and this time no one had to squint to find improvement. It was measurable. Not miraculous, not dramatic, but real. Evan's shoulders lifted a fraction, the closest he came to visible relief. Then he sat down for follow-up and doctor. Helen Ward stripped the moment back to its actual size. "This is progress," she said, one hand resting on the chart. "It is not safety." Evan looked from the paper to her face as if one of them might offer a more generous interpretation. "You're moving toward the target," she continued. "That matters. But if your breathing stays unstable, if your oxygen keeps dipping with minor exertion, if the swelling keeps building, the way it is now, the number on the scale will not be enough to take you to surgery." The room went quiet around that sentence. Rachel, seated near the wall, lowered her eyes to the folder in her lap. She had become the keeper of all the practical things, cards, dates, confirmations, transport windows, but even those details now seemed secondary to the body itself, which was still refusing to behave like a clean equation. Outside, a rolling stool squeaked past the door. Inside, Dr. Ward tapped the timeline once. "You are halfway through the deadline," she said. "Day 38 is not the time to assume the rest will take care of itself." The days kept reducing after that. The reminders came from different directions, but they all sounded like the same clock. A call from scheduling, a notation on the next visit sheet. Rachel reading times out loud in the van while cold light slid across the parking lot, and Evan stared ahead. 11 days left. By then, he had done enough to earn belief from other people if belief had been the system he was dealing with. His weigh-ins had improved. His food discipline had improved. Transfers, while still ugly, no longer threatened to unravel every single morning. Yet the mismatch remained. His ankles still swelled against his socks by afternoon. His abdomen still looked too tight on certain days. Sometimes, after what should have been a small exertion, his breathing turned rough and quick in a way that did not match the cleaner line of the numbers. Hope lived there anyway, but only in the way a weak beam of light lives under a closing door. At the next recheck, the chart showed he had moved closer still, close enough that the room itself seemed to lean toward possibility. Evan saw it. Rachel saw it. Even the nurse's tone changed just slightly when she finished writing down the result. Dr. Ward did not. If you hit the number and your body is still unstable, she said, the door can still close. There it was again. The rule beneath the progress, the harder law under the hopeful one. So the chapter did not end with relief. It ended with arithmetic and uncertainty. The clock was still running. The scale might be improving. But Evan's body could already be preparing to betray him in a way that was worse than missing the target outright. By the morning of surgery, the whole story seemed to have been reduced to one last number. Then that number went the wrong way. Hospital intake moved with the clipped efficiency of a place that had seen every kind of hope arrive on time and fail under fluorescent light. Evan Calder was rolled from one checkpoint to the next with Rachel walking beside the bed and a nurse reading through the final confirmations in a voice that stayed even no matter what answer came back. Name, date of birth, procedure, allergies, last intake. Each question made the morning feel more official and therefore more fragile. The bariatric scale waited in its own small room metal platform, wiped clean, displayed dark until the technician stepped forward. Evan's face had the fixed look of a man who understood that nothing left in this process was symbolic. The target from 75 days earlier had followed him all the way here. So had the line Dr. Helen Ward had given him. 60 pounds, 75 days, or no surgery. The technician settled the chair, checked the reading, then checked it again. The number climbed. It stopped above where it should have been. No one in the room spoke right away. Rachel's hand tightened on the strap of her purse. Evan stared at the display as if anger might force it backward. For a moment, the weeks of discipline, the tighter routine, the measured progress, the van rides, the clinic visits, the shrinking meals, the effort that had finally become real, all of it seemed to collapse into the same merciless conclusion. He had missed. By the time they brought him back to the pre-op bay, the entire morning had changed shape. What had felt like a narrow path now looked like a wall. The pulse oximeter went on again. His breathing, already strained by the transfers, did not settle the way anyone wanted. A nurse adjusted his position. The oxygen line shifted under his nose. Still, his chest worked too hard for a man lying still. Evan turned his head toward Rachel only once. "That's it," he said, voice thin with effort. "I blew it." Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it. There was nothing useful to say before the doctor arrived. When Dr. Helen Ward came in, she did not start with reassurance or disappointment. She started with the chart, the scale result, the oxygen reading, the visible swelling in his lower legs, the tight pull across his abdomen, the breathlessness that no longer matched cleanly with the numbers they had expected to see today. She stood there long enough for everyone else in the room to stop guessing. "This isn't simple," she said at last. That was not relief. It was worse than relief. It meant the problem was growing more complicated, not less. She asked for repeat vitals. She asked for a rapid reassessment. The bed turned away from the direct line to the operating room and back toward the corridor where a technician was already waiting. Wheels rolled over tile. Rachel followed at a distance that made her part of the movement without letting her interrupt it. The trip down the hall had none of the emotional drama people imagined when they pictured last chances. It had forms, clipped instructions, monitor leads, and a body revealing itself one pressure point at a time. In the reassessment area, Dr. Ward looked less at Evan's frustration than at his physiology. The swelling had worsened. His oxygen stability was poor. His breathing had a wet labor drag to it now, and all the warning signs that had shadowed the past few weeks, ankles filling skin, stretching exhaustion out of proportion to effort, began to align into a different pattern. The scale spike did not erase the question of compliance. It sharpened another question beside it. This amount of gain this fast, with this level of swelling and this respiratory strain, Dr. Ward said mostly to the room, partly to herself. We are not looking at one problem. She did not dramatize the rest. She did not need to. Fluid retention, cardiac strain, a body already near its limits now holding and misreporting its crisis through weight pressure and breath. The danger did not decrease when that became clear. It increased. Missing the target would have been one kind of failure. This was another, the possibility that Evan's body was deteriorating underneath the process in a way that made every choice narrower and more urgent. Outside the OR threshold, Dr. Ward made the hardest decision of the story. Not whether the morning had gone well. It had not. Not whether the body was in danger. It was. The question was whether the failure in front of her was simple enough to justify shutting the door completely or complex enough to leave it barely open. When she finally spoke, her voice stayed low and procedural. We are not canceling outright, she said, but nothing about this is safe by default. We proceed only because the picture is more complicated than the scale alone. The sentence did not sound like victory. It sounded like a narrow permission granted at the edge of something worse. The door had not slammed shut, but being allowed to move through it did not mean Evan Calder was anywhere near safe. The easing of the story did not arrive like a grand victory. It came the way a final tightening sometimes stops, just enough for a person who had been pinned against the edge of his own body to have a few different seconds inside it. The hospital room was quiet in the measured way recovery rooms often are. Not silent. Machines still marked time. Rubber soles still passed in the hallway. A nurse came in, checked a line, checked a monitor, and left with the same calm she had brought in. Nothing in the room suggested miracle. That was what made the change believable. Evan Calder looked smaller, only in the way crisis can make a man seem less trapped when it loosens its grip. His body was still fragile. The bed still had rails. The room still smelled faintly of antiseptic and warmed plastic. But the central fact had changed. The last door had not closed on him. Rachel stood near the window with both hands around a paper cup gone lukewarm. Relief showed on her face only once and only briefly when the nurse finished checking his numbers without calling for anyone else. After that, she went back to stillness, as though any larger reaction would ask the room to promise more than it could. Dr. Helen Ward came in near the end of the afternoon. She reviewed the chart, asked 2 short questions, listened to his breathing, and gave no speech about courage or second chances. Her presence was its own answer. The body that had nearly failed its way out of surgery had for now held. Later, when the room had settled again, Evan asked to stand. The nurse moved closer but did not touch him. Rachel took 1 step forward, then stopped. Evan turned, carefully braced, and pushed himself upright beside the bed. The effort showed immediately in his face, but not in panic. His legs trembled. His breathing stayed with him. 1 second. 2. By the time he reached 6, the moment had become larger than it looked. He was not restored, not redeemed, not suddenly safe. He was simply standing there, unsupported in a hospital room that had once seemed likely to deny him even this much. Dr. Ward, watching from the doorway, gave the smallest nod and nothing more. That was enough. The story did not need a lesson. It had its image, a man who had not been promised rescue, only one last narrow opening, holding himself upright for 6 earned seconds on the far side of it. By evening, The monitored room had gone back to its ordinary sounds, the soft pulse of machines, the hallway footsteps, the quiet rustle of a chart being closed, yet nothing in it meant quite what it had meant that morning. The bed rails were still there. The air still carried the clean hospital smell, and Evan's body was still a body that would need watching, but the 6 seconds he had stood beside that bed had already changed the shape of the room. In a story ruled by weight numbers and narrowing margins, that small stretch of balance was enough to prove the door had not closed when it easily could have. Sometimes survival does not arrive as triumph. It arrives as a steadier breath, a doctor's silence, and one hard-won image that does not need to explain itself. If this story stayed with you, share your thoughts below.